Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here and to be able to speak and with these terrific panelists with me. My name is Charles Sills. I'm the president and CDO of an organization called the American Defense Alliance, and we run major defense contracting and procurement conferences around the country. And in that capacity, I've gained a lot of experience in representing and helping the defense industrial community, small businesses from veteran owned to women owned, et cetera, in the defense and the larger government procurement acquisition context. So if I can add anything to this discussion, I'll certainly do that in terms of lobbying, advocacy, and government relations in the defense sector.
My name is Richard Horowitz. I'm an attorney admitted in New York, DC, and in Israel. I'm a former private investigator and former officer in Israeli army. I'll be speaking on the legal aspects of advocacy groups, trade associations. The first bullet point on the agenda is how to establish a trade association. So I'll be speaking on the difference between tax-exempt, nonprofit, for-profit lobbying or government relations agencies and how they work and what are the advantages and disadvantages.
Hi, everybody. Don Erickson. I'm the CEO of the Security Industry Association. We represent about 1,600 companies globally, many of whom are headquartered in the US, but multinational companies. These companies either manufacture or install, integrate security systems and security products, video surveillance, biometric devices, perimeter security. We likewise operate a number of events around the country and around the world, particularly in Mexico City and in the US. And we also have a very strong advocacy program on a variety of issues.
Hello, everybody. My name is Marina Aktinova. I'm a president of ALLATRA International Public Movement. This is international nonprofit. We have chapters in 180 countries. Our main goal is to study the natural disasters from the geophysical aspect of it. So we are studying from the perspective of why, looking for the reason of what's happening, what started this entire process of forming different anomalies inside of our planet, as well as studying the additional factors that can contribute to accelerating of natural disasters around the world. So basically what we see right now in the world.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, or depending where else you may be, good evening, good night, or good morning. Dialing in from. I'm Eric Ellman. I'm the president of the National Consumer Reporting Association. I have spent about 30 years as an association executive in the consumer reporting industry space, representing credit bureaus and other consumer reporting agencies here in the US, with an active practice across the world, particularly in Europe, but also in Africa, Asia, and beyond.
Okay, I think I could take this. We're going to start with Richard Horowitz. What role does legal work play in your organization's lobbying activities or in your clients? Could you please provide a specific case where legal strategies were pivotal in achieving lobbying objectives?
Okay, so as a lawyer, regarding the question, I would say let's look at the wording of the question. What role does legal work play in your organization's lobbying activity? I don't have an organization. I'm a lawyer. So the question should be, what role does legal work playing in my clients' lobbying activities? Well, then you can refine the question again. The answer is the same role it plays in every lobbying organization. It's nothing different about it. So why my clients' organizations? So why am I asking these questions? Okay, so let me ask this. Can a nonprofit organization make a profit? Yes. Second question. Does a nonprofit organization have to pay corporate income tax on its profits? The answer is yes, unless it has a tax exemption. So now let's analyze, why do some lobbying organizations or firms or government relations firms are for-profit and why are non-profit tax exempt? The answer is, a client of mine once asked me whether he should create a for-profit or a nonprofit? And I told him, well, it's more likely for you to raise $100,000 in donations than for you to raise $100,000 in business profit. So it's a business decision. It's not a legal decision. What's the definition of a nonprofit organization? Definition is an organization whose profits are not distributed among its officers, shareholders, or owners. In other words, the profits remain within the organization in order to promote the work of the nonprofit organization. What's a tax-exempt organization? Tax-exempt organization is a nonprofit that applies for tax exemption from the IRS. Nonprofit is how you incorporate. When you incorporate, it's done by state, often in Delaware. So if someone says this company is incorporated in America, well, what you need to know is in what state. You incorporate, you tell the state whether you're incorporating as a for-profit or a nonprofit. After you've been incorporated, then you file an application to the IRS for a tax exemption. Okay, so we've heard of 501c3 organizations. What does 501 mean? 501 what? The answer is Title 26 of the U.S. Code. The U.S. Code, it's laws passed in Congress. The U.S. Code is divided now today into 52 titles. Title 18 is criminal law. So if you hear 18 U.S.C. 1956, that's money laundering. If your lawyer is dealing with Title 11, Section 362, that's not good. That means you're in bankruptcy. You're filing for an automatic stay of litigation if you're if you're dealing with the tax code is Title 26. So 501c3 means Section 501 of Title 26 of the IRS code. Okay, so now if you look at 501A and B, it's not relevant for now. 501c, there are about 29 or 28 subsections. C3, C4, C6, C18 through 29, and they're all different things. There are about 1.5 million 501Cs, 3/4 of them are C3s. C3s are what normally charities, educational or religious institutions are. A tax exemption means whatever profit you get, you don't have to pay taxes on it. The advantage of a C3 is that the donations to the C3 are tax exempt, but it's common for lobbying or government relations groups to be C4 or C6. C4 is a social welfare, is a civic league operating for the exclusive promotion of social welfare. Okay, like the ACLU is a C3. C6 are business leagues. American Medical Association, American Bar Association. Planned Parenthood, the formal name of the organization of the C3 is the Planned Parenthood Federation of America. So that's C3, C4, and C6 explained. C4 and C6 has a disadvantage that the donations to it are not tax deductible. C3s are tax deductible. None of them, since they're 501Cs, pay income tax on their profits. Only the C3 is tax deductible. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages. C3 is very limited in terms of how it could lobby. There are various tests in terms of how much it could lobby. It's always best to have a lawyer involved in the decision what you can do. The good news is it's not that hard to get it right. The C4 and C6 contributions to it are not tax deductible, but it could lobby unlimited lobbying when it comes to direct lobbying, meaning going to Congress, provided the lobbying is related to its tax exempt purpose. Limitations on how much can be tax deductible if lobbying is grassroots lobbying. Single most important lesson of all of this is that the money that is raised whether you're a C3, 4, or 6, money that is raised has to be spent on the tax exempt purpose for which it's raised. That's the most important. Now, since C4s and C6s can lobby, and C3s to a very lesser extent, there are limitations, they have to be aware of the Lobbying Disclosure Act and the Foreign Agent Registration Act. If you're in the foreign, nothing in the IRS code tells you when you have to deal with the other two acts. And the other two acts, Lobbying Disclosure Act and Foreign Agent Registration, don't talk about C3s. But they, in general, if you satisfy the requirements of those two acts, you have to register. Those are areas of law where you don't want to make a mistake. So it's, of course, best to have lawyers involved. The last point I'd like to make is that it's common for C3s or C4s to have associated organizations. In other words, Planned Parenthood is a C3. It deals with reproductive health and educational issues. They have a related organization called Planned Parenthood Action Fund. That's a C4 that does lobbying on those issues. The ACLU is a C4. It does lobbying on civil liberties issues. It has a related organization, which is a C3, the ACLU Foundation, that raises money to educate people on issues that they promote. The American Medical Association is a C6, but it has a related association, Medical AMA Foundation. That's a C3. That raises money for all sorts of pro bono charitable medical issues, but it doesn't lobby on behalf of the C6. So whenever you want to deal, if a C4 or 6 wants a related C3, then that's an area where you have to work closely with it. So if it's a C3, 4, 6, and they want to have related associations, if you're lobbying C4 and C6, you have to be aware of the Lobbying Disclosure Act and the Foreign Agent Registration Act. Best, of course, to be in touch with an attorney. And then there are plenty of forms that have to be filed. It's common for accountants to deal with those forms. Lawyers should review them, but the accountants, those forms basically want to know how you're spending the money. The accountants are the ones who have the figures readily at hand. They fill out the forms. The lawyers should review them. That is, in my 5-minute presentations, are the basic laws related to these issues.
Now I'm going to ask Marana, your work in combating climate change involves both legislative advocacy and information campaigns. How do you conduct this work, particularly in collaboration with non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and other supranational entities?
Questions. The problem that we are raising as an organization, it's definitely, we really want to emphasize that these are the problems for the entire community. So, and our biggest concern and biggest goal right now to make sure that our research will reach those who is in position to make a decision. So very smart people will be able to look at the research and understand and calculate the progression and understand what kind of action we need to take as a society. Of course, in order for that information is to be reached to those who are in position to make a decision, government, organization, or business also can implement those steps. So we conduct informational campaign. We produce different types of report that we can share with people. But for the general public, we also produce a documentary so that that format is digestible, it's understandable, it brings awareness and helps people to motivate themselves to act, because we understand that even so, we and the society and the democratic society really work through the government, through the lobbies, through the different, but we also cannot underestimate the demand that the civil society can create in order to implement this or other policy. And for example, I don't know if the time will allow, I would like to ask technical support to play a short movie, a short clip from the documentary movie that you recently produced that show us the problem that right now is very, very big. It's the nanoplastic, how it's polluted, how we polluted the ocean, and how nanoplastic harm our bodies. And recently, there was President Trump asked Mr. Kennedy to do the research about the autism syndrome. Why right now in the United States, if it was like 10 years ago, every 10,000 child was born with autism. Right now it's every 36. Yeah, child. And in 2 generations, every second child will be born with autism. And believe me, this documentary that you produce based on the scientific facts, different research from different institutions, but the information we showed in a very, very soft way in order not to scare the public. The real threat is even more bigger. So if you allow, so we can watch.
It's like your brain overloads and you just can't think anymore. Like your head is about to explode. The lights, the sounds, everything. It's just too much.
Okay.
I've always felt lonely. I never really participated in life. I guess people just tolerated me. It's hard to put into words what it feels like to be on the outside, looking in.
I remember how desperate I felt at the age of 3 because I couldn't speak. I understood the words people said to me, but I couldn't force a single word out in response. It felt like an extreme case of stuttering, and it drove me mad. I vividly remember thinking logically and realizing that the only way I could communicate was to scream.
Plastic. It isn't just the trash that we see on the streets or in our oceans. It's already inside of us, inside of our bodies, our homes, our children. A comparison of graphs and a clear correlation urge a deeper investigation into the role of plastic pollution in the development of autism. Microplastics are everywhere. Particles of micro and nanoplastics are tiny plastic fragments that have become new inhabitants of our planet. They're everywhere. From the highest point, Mount Everest, to the deepest Mariana Trench. The entire world ocean is saturated with microplastics. Every drop of ocean water contains these tiny plastic particles. As water evaporates, microplastics rise into the atmosphere from the ocean's surface and can be carried by the wind across the entire planet. They also become part of the sea breeze we breathe. Each year, approximately 136,000 metric tons of microplastics are blown on shore by the sea breeze. Now, when we swim in the ocean, sunbathe on the beach, or jog along the shore in an effort to stay healthy, we're only increasing the impact of microplastics on our bodies. Micro and nanoplastics rising from the surface of oceans and seas are dispersed throughout the atmosphere. Forests, like sponges, absorb them. Poor ventilation beneath dense forest canopies leads to a constant buildup of these particles in the treetops, Italian scientists have discovered that fruits and vegetables also contain millions of microplastic particles. Scientists from the University of Newcastle, Australia, set out to determine how much plastic a modern person consumes. They found that on average, a person ingests 250 grams of plastic per year, equivalent to 50 plastic bags. The microplastic threat to emerging life. The first 1,000 days of life, from conception to the age of 2, are critical for the development of the brain and the entire body. During this period, special mechanisms regulate gene activity, which can be activated or suppressed by external factors such as nutrition, stress, and the environment. These changes can affect not only the individual, but also their children and grandchildren. Micro and nanoplastics are found in seminal and follicular fluids, as well as in the placenta and umbilical cord blood, which indicates their potential presence in the embryo from the earliest stages of development. This period is critical, as it lays the foundation for the future child's body. Exposure to nanoplastics at this stage can cause significant harm to the embryo, potentially affecting its further development. A study by Korean scientists experimentally demonstrates the impact of microplastics before and after birth as a potential risk factor for autism spectrum disorders. Penetration of plastic particles into the brain. The equivalent of an entire plastic spoon. That's roughly the amount of microplastic in our brains. The concentrations we saw in the brain tissue of normal individuals, who had an average age of around 45 or 50 years old, were 4,800 micrograms of plastic particles per gram, or 0.48% by weight. That would mean that our brains today are 99.5% brain, and the rest is plastic, explained Matthew Campen, lead researcher from the University of New Mexico. Accumulating in the brain's small blood vessels, they contribute to the formation of microthrombi, which disrupt blood supply and microcirculation, increasing the risk of stroke even at a young age. As a result, nanoplastic particles impair the supply of oxygen and nutrients to brain cells, leading to chronic hypoxia and the gradual death of neurons. These processes drive neurodegenerative changes, including brain atrophy, which, with prolonged exposure, can lead to a reduction in the volume of specific brain structures. According to research, individuals with dementia had 3 to 5 times higher concentrations of microplastic in their brains than healthy individuals. Moreover, exposure to micro and nanoplastics contributes to the development of Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, and encephalopathy. It also increases the risk of neuropsychiatric disorders, such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and autism. Microplastics have been detected in nearly all human tissues, including hair, lungs, kidneys, liver, and spleen. They have also been found in meconium, breast milk, placenta, blood, and urine. Exposure to phthalates, which are present in plastics, increases the risk of developing childhood cancers by 20%. Specifically, the incidence of bone cancer has tripled, while the rates of lymphoma and blood cancers have doubled. It is projected that by 2050, the number of new cancer cases will rise by 77%. Nanoplastics affect not only the brain but also the bone marrow, where they accumulate and interfere with stem cell formation. By damaging stem cells, nanoplastics cause irreparable harm to all the body's organs and tissues. Studies have shown that micro and nanoparticles in arteries are a significant risk factor for cardiovascular diseases. These particles harm blood cells, weaken the immune system, and trigger inflammation and vascular damage. Nanoparticles disrupt the normal function of blood proteins and cause red blood cell and platelet aggregation, which can lead to thrombosis, heart diseases, and vascular conditions. Research also indicates that microplastics can accumulate in atherosclerotic plaques within carotid arteries, increasing the risk of heart attack and stroke. This film presents just a small fraction of the information available today about the harm caused by plastics. However, even this is enough to grasp the gravity of the situation. Trap for Humanity.
Probably will need to add a couple of words after that clip. So as we said, so it just like really small part of the information and the softest version of it. And we also will talk about the solution for that problem as well, because there is one, and there is only the question about like if we as a humanity would like to implement it. We definitely need to rethink our disposal and recycling process, make it more profitable, make it really advantageous for everybody, because our society works that without economical gain, so we will not recycle. Unfortunately, we as a humanity, we didn't recycle like almost like anything. Like only the 9% of the entire plastic that we produce since 1975 we recycle. So the rest we dropped in the ocean. And another thing, we do not have a technology right now how to extract nanoplastic from our brains, our bodies. But we do have a technology that can extract nanoplastic from the air, the one that our ocean evaporates. So, and this is air water generator, and Israel plays very important role in this process. They're leading an air water generator production. So, but again, so if we want to implement this technology, we need to implement it globally. Like one local machine will not help. So we definitely need to do it around the world. And again, it's a very profitable business. So it will not only help us to remove nanoplastic from the atmosphere, but it also produce a lot of water that we can use. And you know the water right now is more expensive than the oil. So that's why there is a information, there are like some ideas that we can implement. And now the question for the entire humanity, if we will be able to implement that. Thank you.
Very powerful, very powerful. I remember many years ago, friends of mine were investing in the nanotechnology. If only I knew.
Short comment.
Sure.
So why don't we just stop using plastic? I remember in 90s we had barely you could find plastic, almost glass. So why don't we just ban these companies and ban plastic production? But I will tell you why, because it's more profitable.
No.
It's also convenient. I would think it's convenient. I remember years ago, in my community, people have lots of children, and you can see literally the day after the Sabbath or after a holiday, garbage bags full of plastic, dishes that look almost like dishes, but they're plastic. It hurts me. I fight with my family all the time. I say, let's go to China and glass. And they say, oh, the water is just as you're using up water. It's bad for the environment. I say, no, that plastic, it doesn't disintegrate.
And that's poisonous.
I agree. I mean, it's,
let me answer your question. So even right now, if we ban plastic production, so that will not help us as a humanity for right now, because the amount of nanoplastic is in the ocean. It's enough to like kill the humanity like a couple of times. So those poisonous particles are already in the water, and yes, and that's why so definitely we will need to clean the ocean to remove like big parts. But without the air water generators, we will not be able to extract them from the air.
Well, maybe some of our panelists could respond to that in terms of lobbying. Let me just put out a question to Charles Sills. Given your extensive experience in government contracting and advocacy for small and medium businesses, what are the most significant barriers preventing those businesses from accessing federal and military procurement opportunities? And what policy changes do you believe could make the most impact in improving their participation?
Thank you for the question. I guess for the moment, I'll have to leave the
Yeah.
incredibly significant and critical microplastic discussion for the moment. But so when we're talking about government and especially defense lobbying and advocacy, there are several levels. One level is the very fierce lobbying and competition between the very large defense uh, ensconced companies. For example, Boeing just won the $20 billion contract to build the next fighter jet called the
F-35?
no, it's called the F-47,
Oh.
named for President Trump's 47th presidency, and this is the next generation air dominance NGAD fighter plane. That's $20 billion, but it's going to be followed by hundreds of billions of dollars for at scale volume production over decades, plus the aftermarket parts, plus the software going into it, and the software refreshes and all that. So you have Lockheed, in this case, Lockheed versus Boeing, lobbying the government, the Armed Forces Committee in Congress that controls the Armed Forces budget, and the Pentagon and defense officials who have to get together to decide who's going to win. So this is one level of lobbying. On another level, almost completely, are the small businesses, thousands of small businesses, woman-owned, veteran-owned, minority-owned, et cetera, in the defense industrial base. And for years, these veteran organizations, women's organizations, et cetera, have lobbied and advocated for more access to government contracting, which has been largely successful to the extent that about 25% of all federal contracting is mandated for small business participation, small business awards. Now, so the good results of this, for example, a lot of people know about DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, where the internet was invented, et cetera. Now, DARPA specializes in getting advanced tech into the defense industrial world and getting it out to the warfighters. Now, the child of DARPA is DIU, the Defense Innovation Unit, which has been very successful in especially helping small businesses through non-federal acquisition regulations, meaning other transaction authorities, meaning in simple language that they don't have to compete. They can get sole source awards for technologies that only that small company has. So then the grandchildren of DARPA are the Defense Works, WERXs, and there are 13 of them, one for CIA, one for Special Operations Forces, etc. I've made a partnership with them, and they provide speakers for my conferences to meet with advanced tech companies that come to my conferences. This is all really good news and progress. However, there are counteracting, because you said, what are the barriers? There are counteracting developments, and one of these is called category management, where different government agencies think that they can cut costs by putting out, let's say, roofing for all government or military bases or buildings. Well, if we don't just let those contracts out per base or per agency or per the Army or the Navy, if we combine them for all government buildings, then that'll save money because it'll be standardized. However, think of what that does for the individual roofing companies. No small business can possibly bid that kind of a gigantic multi-billion-dollar contract. So that development is going against small business participation, and there's been a lot of lobbying pushback against that in the last few years. So those are just kind of some examples in the defense world.
Thank you. That's very interesting.
Thank you.
Let me go to Eric. Let's continue this dialogue. What specific tools does your organization employ in its lobbying efforts? Which of those tools have maintained consistent over time, and which have involved in response to changes in the political and social landscape?
Great, thank you for the question, Ezra. I'll give you kind of a composite answer to help add some context to the conversation. Like I said before, when I first introduced myself, my career has largely been spent in the financial services space, primarily in the US, globally, and more specifically around credit reporting, credit bureaus, and consumer reporting. We are often attacked by consumer groups for standing as an obstacle in the way of consumers who are claiming that there may be alleged inaccuracies on credit reports, or it's hard to dispute credit reports or things like that. So one of the things that we provide to help educate legislators and educate staff people, my view of the role of a lobbyist is often as an educator, because you're dealing with either members of Congress or their staff or attorneys general or the administration, and they may have preconceived notions about whatever your industry is. And it's my job and the job of a lobbyist to try to provide education, to try to disabuse them of some of those preconceived notions. Great ways to do that are with facts and data and studies. So, for example, we as an industry got together over the course of many years to put together studies that show the high degree of accuracy of credit reports, the ease and the speed with which consumer disputes are processed. We work with consumer organizations to try to help smooth any of the tension that may exist between us and people that might have a different point of view and things like that. So Ezra, that is a simplified answer to your important question. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you, thank you. And now, Don Erickson,
Yes, sir.
which lobby tools are most effective in your industry, particularly concerning media interactions? How do you engage with journalists and media outlets to advance your association's interests?
Right. Well, Ezra, first of all, thanks to everybody for the invitation to be here. It's a great conference. Ezra, thank you for moderating it, and to the fellow panelists. Let me take a step back. I want to pick up on his comments before I answer that question a little bit. If you're operating a government affairs program anywhere in the world, please comply with local laws, right? And I will share it sounds very basic, but I started this association almost 20 years ago. And when I worked in the US Senate for a number of years, I worked for another association, I worked for a federal agency. First day I walked in, I found that the association had not filed its LDA forms, Lobbying Disclosure Act forms, for about 2 years.
Oh.
So I had to backfill all those forms and document issues and so forth. Fortunately, through the Lobbying Disclosure Office, Ethics Office, they accommodated us. But pay attention to the basics and the basic compliance issues, I think is great advice.
Very, very good advice.
Very good advice.
And I'll tell you, as a lobbyist, I remember on a July 3rd, right before July 4th weekend, July 4th, I think was on a Saturday and a Friday, I received a registered letter, like the City of New York, local lobbying. It said like the equivalent of Department of Justice and FBI. It's like, you know, you got to go to the post office to sign for it. And I was like sweating bullets. What did I do wrong? And I came in with all the post office was already closed. And that weekend, I was like thinking I'm going to jail.
Right.
On Monday morning, we forgot to file. You know, you have $25 a day delay. Since then, my compliance people know the moment it arrives, they fill it out and they just submit it right back.
And so, Ezra, you are an honorable man. I can tell as a lobbyist that you're fantastic.
Continue what you were saying.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
no, absolutely. So lobbying is really important. Just a little side note on that. Media relations. So let's take a minute and talk about the tools, picking up Eric's point, that are essential to a government relations program, and I'll lead into media after a moment. In-house lobbyists, right? You have to have a policy agenda first and foremost that's compelling and representative of your member interests. In-house lobbyists, perhaps federal and state lobbyists. You might have a state network of lobbyists that you contract out to. You may have a government relations committee that validates your positions and prioritizes your issues. You have a board, obviously. In my opinion, and I'm probably dating myself a little bit, there was a phrase back in the mid-90s that was used. If you didn't see it above the fold, go back to the old print newspapers, right? That once existed. If you didn't see it above the fold, it didn't happen if you didn't read about it. And I've always subscribed for 30 years to that philosophy. Now, we're not talking about old newspapers anymore, print newspapers. Now we're in social media and other platforms, blogs, etc. To me, one of the most essential aspects of any effective government affairs program is effective media relations. And how do you do that? So first of all, you have, in our industry, we have industry trade press. So we have publications that cover security products. We have publications that cover security integration. And then we have publications that cover security practitioners, those that are implementing security technologies or focused on risk management within enterprises or government agencies or residentially. Essential to have relationships with each in the trade press and foster those relationships. Oftentimes, though, they can become competitors because the key aspect of government relations is to develop content. And what are they in? They're in the content business as well. So a little bit of an ongoing battle between content about webinars and articles and columns and so forth, but they can be real allies. In this town in particular, what's really essential, it's politics, policy, and people, but it's information, right? And so you can be a great friend to media by sharing information. Maybe it's some things you've heard in your industry. Maybe you heard a bill's going to be introduced. Maybe it's directly related to your association. Maybe it's on the periphery. Feeding information that's credible and reliable to media fosters those relationships. Really, really important. The second point I'll make about media is social media. We lean in very, very heavily on LinkedIn for advocacy purposes. Now, you could argue on the federal basis, I think the Congressional Management Foundation's put out studies about which platforms congressional staff look to and pay attention to, whether it's Twitter or LinkedIn. My opinion, the most powerful platform right now is LinkedIn, right? If you're going to get a message out in the business community. We use that really effectively because it also encourages member engagement in government relations initiatives. So definitely lean into LinkedIn in terms of media outreach. So point number one, we're building the relationships with reporters and trade press. 2, leading into social media. 3, there may be times that you want to go out and spend a little bit of money and have print ads and so forth. I think that's a downward trajectory in terms of investment on government affairs. It's really the social media play for the most part. What we found, you have Politico and others out there, but probably not the great use of resources. The last thing I'll say about media outreach is you have all different forms of it right now. So you have TikTok, you have bloggers, you have LinkedIn I mentioned. I know TikTok is I think my marketing team heard me say this, they would go a little crazy. I know TikTok is very controversial, particularly in the US. Eventually it's going to be sold, to a hopefully US company. That's going to become accelerate really, really fast for advocacy purposes because it's going to engage all new types of communities as evidenced by the Trump campaign, right? And that's not a political comment, but the Trump campaign used it really, really effectively. So consider that a form of media, social media, and then one that you also have to be leaning into. And then one of my last points is just this morning, we engaged an outside PR firm. We've had them, but we put them on high alert. We're facing a very significant regulatory issue at the FCC. It's basically a spectrum grab that's going to impact public safety and the availability of security products. Your association, in my opinion, should have a PR firm on retainer anyway to support your programs, but we're prioritizing our PR firm to focus on this one government relations issue. Why? Because it's going to get us into the mainstream press. It's going to get us into consumer-oriented publications that Eric's familiar with. It's going to get us into the Wall Street Journal. It's going to get us New York Times, as we've done on other government relations issues. So that would really be my final point is public relations firm is really critical to a media strategy as a government affairs professional. Thank you.
Very good. Okay. This brings our presentation, at least this portion, to a close. Thank you very much to my fellow panelists. We're very grateful, and I give the floor over to the